Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
I want to begin, though, with a conversation about people who I used to think everybody would agree deserve the utmost protection and support from the British public. I don't know what's the biggest shift you've undertaken in your understanding of life in recent years. My God, there's been loads. But when I saw, as you know, if you listen regularly, firefighters getting demonised by newspapers, I couldn't quite believe my eyes. That was in the context of industrial action, and it goes back nearly a decade now. But, of course, it also speaks of a mood, an environment in which the people that... I'm 45 years old, and when I was a kid, you looked at people like... I think you did. Maybe I've got rose-tinted retrospectacles on. It's a good word, retrospectacles. Someone write that down, seriously. I think when we were growing up, that teachers... head teachers, for example, they were being attacked on the front page of the Daily Mail yesterday. Firefighters, doctors, certainly, no? They've been attacked, of course, front and centre by most of the right-wing media. I just feel we have more respect and trust for these people. Police, certainly. Relationship between the public and the police really seems to have shifted in the course of my lifetime in quite a strange direction. I don't want to overly generalise, he says, while preparing to overly generalise. But I used to look at the police as a force of protection, as a sort of friendly force, in a way that now I don't in quite the same way. I still passionately believe that they're rights in the workplace should be protected by the British public. But something's shifted in my personal perception of the police. I'm not quite sure why. But you know, the list goes on, doesn't it? You're talking about public sector workers. You are talking essentially about the police, the emergency services, teachers, the people who look after us. And this, at risk of possibly over-egging the pudding, this is the social change of my lifetime, isn't it? And you can possibly bring almost every story into this analysis. Even something like the Grenfell Tower tragedy speaks of the fetishisation of profit, of money, where if you're doing something that doesn't deliver a dividend, you're worthless. That seems to be the neoliberal. I'm not entirely sure what people mean when they use that word, but that seems to me to be the pursuit of profit at all costs, the size of the dividend delivered to shareholders at the end of a process is the driving force, the engine of our economy. I think this held true under Blair. It certainly was introduced under Thatcher, and it seems to me to speak of a society in which we were groomed almost to not bat an eyelid in 2010 when politicians told us that in order to plug a hole in finances caused by the excesses and the absurdities and in some cases the borderline quasi-corruption of the financial sector, of the banking sector, in order to plug holes in the public finances caused by financial professionals, we had to cut the wing, we had to clip the wings of public sector workers. Yeah, I wonder whether when we look back on this period of history, we'll wonder what happened to us. Just never mind Brexit, but when we look back on this, we'll wonder quite what happened to us, how we managed to get conditioned into a position where even the very suggestion that you plug a gap in public finances by simultaneously cutting the top rate of income tax and capping below inflation the pay rises available to me, the most valuable members of our society. I don't think I'm being a hypocrite. I get paid several times more than the average firefighter does, or the average police officer, or indeed the average teacher. I make no bones about that. It's why I'm one of that weird but growing breed of people who think that the tax system should be redrawn to take a little bit more money off the people at the top and a little bit less off the people lower down. That's champagne socialism, because I've got a few quid. If I didn't have any money, that would of course be the politics of envy, because nobody's allowed to question this fetishisation of profit. Nobody's allowed to query the fundamental fairness of a system that really was built upon those twin economic policies back in 2010. A cut in the top rate of income tax for the highest earners in the country, and a pay cap below inflation, which means pay cuts in consecutive years where inflation is anywhere above 1%, every year that inflation is above 1%, your children's teachers get a pay cut. Every year that inflation is above 1%, your children's doctor gets a pay cut. Your nurse, your mum's carer, if it's in the public sector. Every single year that inflation is above 1%, the firefighters that went into Grenfell Tower 2 weeks ago today had a reduction in their pay. Every single year that inflation is above 1%, the police officers who run towards the terrorists while the rest of us are running away, they got a reduction in their pay. I can do the tabloid thing, you see. I can do the heartstrings. I can push your buttons. Because it's not just the police officers that run towards the terrorists, of course, who have had a pay cut every single year since 2010 when inflation has been above 1%. It's also the police officers who are jobsworths. It's also the firefighters who send 6 appliances to get a cat out of a tree. It just depends what angle you take. I kind of intended to ask you, if you are a public sector worker, how you have felt your finances shift over the course of the last 7 years. Just a very simple question. I still am going to ask you that. I always have in the back of my mind, I've told you this a few times recently, the calls that stay with me forever. You know, some of them are just incredibly powerful, like Shah, who I still can't talk about without having a wobble. The gentleman who was on the phone to his mother and aunt in Grenfell Tower as they died. That was the final call on last Friday's show. And my God, you'll never forget that if you were here when it was broadcast. But some of them aren't that profound. Some of the calls that stay with me forever are a lot simpler. And I always remember, this is going back about 3 years, isn't it? Correct me if I'm wrong. Some of you listen more closely to the programme than I do. Admittedly, most of you are not. Most of the people in that category are a bit bonkers, but some aren't. The police officer who rang in, do you remember? And the combination of the pay freeze, childcare costs, shift changes caused perhaps by cuts to the police service, which have been pretty epic. You remember when the bloke at the Police Federation stood up and said so to the then Home Secretary. He was told to stop scaremongering and crying wolf. They were handing their baby over in a lay-by. Do you remember that call from that policewoman? So she's probably embarrassed that I remember it so well, because it was normal for her, and yet it was staggering to me to hear that because of shift patterns, childcare costs, cuts and financial necessity, they would hand their baby over in a lay-by as he made his way back from shift and she was going out to work as a police officer. That's the thing I never really understood. How we've come as a... Because this is the question I'm also going to ask. I've found a way to include everybody, not just people who work in the public sector. How do you think it happened when you look back now? You may still be on the other side of the fence, in which case let's not fall out. It's fine that you think that police officers and nurses and teachers should be getting a pay cut every year. But if like me, you find it astonishing that you kind of watched that happen without really noticing, like a sort of frog boiling exercise, you know? When you turn the temperature up incrementally so the frog in the water doesn't actually notice that it's being boiled to death until it's dead, at which point it's too dead to notice, so the exercise is effectively over. That's what you do, isn't it? That's what grooming is, actually. Grooming is a frog boiling exercise when you think about it. The incremental shift. Gaslighting is an increment. You do it slowly, catchy monkey, and then by the end of it you look back and you don't quite understand how it happened. Do I sound like a communist when I ask you how you think we came to a place where we sat idly by for 7 years as teachers and doctors, police officers and firefighters, nurses and carers and public sector workers right across the board had their wages cut every year? Or do you still think, you know, don't bash the bankers? I don't know. 0345 60 60 973 is the number you need. Because I've never worked in the public sector, but certainly the wage cuts as a journalist, I was just comparing notes this morning, or what I was doing at 25 and what some of my 25-year-old colleagues do now. And it's, I mean, they're worlds apart. But that's for a whole heap of different reasons. This is government policy. Is it, with regard to the amendment that the Labour Party will table later today, is it clever? Let's do the politics as well, not just the reality of our lives. Is it clever of Corbyn to do this? Because effectively he's going to make every Conservative and DUP member in the House of Commons vote later specifically to cut the wages of public sector workers every single year that inflation is above 1%, which is pretty much going to be every single year for the foreseeable future, isn't it? And then some. That's all. I really mean that. I don't want to have any scraps or any lazy binary mudslinging arguments about lefties and righties and fascists and liberal fascists or whatever it may be. I just want, at a time of epic division and epic disharmony, which, you know, we'll return to in the coming days as we pick over the carcass of these proposals on what EU citizens are supposed to do with the message that they're not at home here anymore, they're just allowed. But we're looking at times of epic division. There's things you could pull together on, I would have thought always as a kid, would have been the coppers and the nurses and the doctors. Am I sounding naive to you? If I'm sounding naive to you, tell me why. Because we've sat here for 7 years, and I have to triple check, but in most of those years, we've been telling the men and women that ran into Grenfell Tower, laden with breathing apparatus, fighting their way through smoke and worse. We've effectively sat idly by and given a thumbs up to them getting a pay cut every year. How do you feel about that as a firefighter, as a public sector worker? I think it's important to ask this question. Again, I could be wrong, but do you feel betrayed by us? Not just by government, but do you feel a little bit betrayed by the British public? Does it change the way you approach your job? If you're a teacher and parents are giving you a hard time, or even you're just moving heaven and earth to do the best job you can do, and yet you know that the public have sort of waved through you getting a pay cut every year. Never mind the attempts to change the pensions, the successful attempts in the case of some sectors. I just want to know what it feels like. Because it seems to me to be almost a sort of dilution of what society used to mean. I don't know why it takes so long for these things to register sometimes. My attention's been drawn to this issue many, many times, but it's an amendment to the Queen's speech later today. Just a simple call for the 1% public sector pay cap to end. And then it puts some politicians in the difficult position of probably knowing that it should end, but party politics being what party politics is, they'll have to vote to keep it in place, especially the DUP, who get £1 billion for doing so. It's a little bit lazy, but, you know. Hey, just give us a call. You can see there's a lot to chew on here, and I mean it most sincerely. What's happened to us? 0345 6060973. So you turn, I mean, as ever, if you want to find an answer to the question of how we've ended up being so bovine and unpleasant, you turn to the Daily Mail, whose front page today is getting cross about a Romanian cannabis grower. And a Romanian convicted robber who needs to go back to Romania, but it's going to take a little bit longer than usual because we don't send people to countries where the prison cells are the size of broom cupboards. It's, you know, you can get as cross or as uncross about that as you want, but if you're getting cross about that and just waving through pay cuts for police officers and firefighters and nurses and doctors, you probably need to have a look at yourself, or at least a look at where you're getting your news from. What matters more to you? The difficulties in deporting a Romanian cannabis grower, or the fact that the men and women who ran into Grenfell Tower as it burned get their pay cut every year? I'm not going mad, am I? 0345 6060973. It's 10:17. A bunch of questions in the introduction. Don't expect me to remember them all, but you can answer whichever one you want in all of the usual ways. Let's start with Jim, who's in Frimley. Just on this question of the people that I'm sure when I was a kid that we all looked up to more than almost anybody else. We've spent 7 years waving through de facto real terms pay cuts for them, Jim. What made you pick up the phone?
I just listened to what you were saying this morning, and I also remember that call about the lay-by and the baby.
Yeah.
Because I actually heard that call a few months ago, and it's only rang.
It was a few years ago, actually, but time flies when you're listening to this programme.
Yeah, we do a similar thing. We both focus, myself and my partner, so we don't stop in lay-bys, but we certainly take over as one walks in the door, the other one walks out. So that's quite normal for us. And I was just thinking from this morning, I looked back to about 10 years ago, in about 2008, and at that point in time we were a couple with no kids. We had sort of both of us were working full time. We had probably the most disposable income we actually had. And things cost a lot less, and we sort of felt fairly well off, I guess, in many ways. But 10 years later, we've got 2 young kids. My wife's now part-time, so she is obviously not bringing home anywhere near as much. She's a part-time nurse anyway, so she doesn't earn a great deal. In that time, costs have rocketed as well. We've got the added cost of childcare on top of that, and a higher mortgage. And suddenly we feel so different in terms of our spending capability, if that makes sense.
Well, of course it does. Some of it is timeless, though. I mean, we talk about BC, my wife and I, before children, and some of the things we used to do before the kids came along. We look back on now, and it makes me feel like Philip Green. But in terms, I mean, and you know, then there's the other stuff that is for you and your wife. I mean, she's gone part-time, so there's less money coming in, and you've got childcare costs, so there's more money coming out. But if you're, what do you do you're a police officer, so you have had since 2010. You haven't been allowed a pay rise that's above that tracks inflation, that's above inflation. So the money that you're taking home every year that inflation is above 1%, you're worse off.
Well, I've been a top rate PC now for about 8 years, so the best part of the last 10 years. And what should have happened, ideally, is my pay would stay the same. And it kind of has on paper. However, when you look at what there's certain payments and sort of not bonuses, but payments and things we would get that we now don't get. And we've also had an increase in our pension, and I think our income tax and national insurance has all risen. So if you look at the actual figure on a flat month, if you look at the figure of what we actually take home over the last 10 years, that has really come down. So when you combine that with the added costs and just general inflation of life, it means that there's a lot less left over.
You don't
month by month, year by year.
You don't sound, actually, just quick as an aside, because of course the traditional lazy right-wing response to this is to say, well, you know, compare like for like. Private sector workers don't get there is no equivalent in the private sector of a police officer or a firefighter or I mean, a teacher, there's an equivalent, but they get paid more. This idea that you can say, well, we haven't had a pay rise and we've had this and we've had that, that's completely missing the point. By all means, send the text in, but understand what the point is. It's about the job that men like Jim do and women like his wife do. They choose to be nurses and police officers. There's no private sector parallel to be drawn when it comes to their income and rewards. But you don't sound political. You don't sound, because the question I'm really interested in is whether, not why, but whether you look at the British public and what they've voted through, what they've waved through over the last 7 years, and you don't sound like you're taking it personally.
I don't at all. I'm not really that politically minded. I've become more interested in politics over the last few years, but I don't think the public, as a general whole, really understand the consequences. I don't think at any point in time anyone would have purposely voted to cut the public sector. It's just what's happened because of a combination of things that have occurred in the last few years. I don't take it personally in the slightest, but I do find...
Well, hang on, because, I mean, Frederick's been in touch. He must be a little bit older than me, because he talks about an ambulance driver's strike being the first public sector industrial action he can remember happening, and the newspapers were urging the population to see ambulance drivers as glorified van drivers. So there is an attempt. I do think there has been a grooming process under which you can have people say, don't bash the bankers, and then sort of waving through essential pay cuts for people like you.
Well, I think there's a lot of blame. If you speak to a lot of my colleagues, there's a lot of feeling of blame towards the government and potentially even the past generation. But
of course,
things have happened, and that's been certainly outside of my control. And I'm 35, so I was brought up in the 80s. I think my parents' generation have had it good. Certainly from my parents' point of view, they made a lot of money on property, retired early, and they're sort of sitting happy. Whereas I almost feel like I had this conversation recently with a few of my friends, almost like my generation, the mid-30s, 40s now, are kind of looking at a life in their middle ages of sort of paying for the mistakes of the past. And, you know, we still live fairly, I say comfortably, we can make it work, but we're nowhere near as comfortable as we were. But I don't know how people that earn the national average wage cope, because myself and my wife earn obviously above that, and we are literally struggling at the moment to the point we haven't struggled before. So people that are earning £25,000, I mean, how do they cope, especially with childcare costs?
I don't know. I don't know.
It's fine, really, because I'm hoping, but I don't know how.
No, nor do I. Well, I mean, we may get some clues. We may find out. Thank you, Jim. Thank you for the call. Thank you for what you do, and you keep in touch. You know, as you say, you remember that call about the lay-by of someone. If we're just enough people keep chipping away at these questions, maybe they'll start get asked at slightly higher levels. In fact, I mean, what am I talking about? This is literally an amendment to the Queen's Speech. We've been banging on about it for years. And tonight it will be an amendment to the Queen's Speech. It won't get voted through, of course, because, hey, you get 10 votes for £1 billion in modern Britain. Matthew is in Singapore. Matthew, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. I'd just like to, this is the first time I've actually called this show.
Am I big in Singapore, Matthew?
You actually are quite, yeah, because I teach in a tuition centre in Singapore, and I think there's quite a few of us that do listen to your show, so they might, tomorrow when I'm in work, I might get some tips.
I was actually joking, but good grief, they'll have to widen the studio door now. What do you want to tell me?
So, as I said, I'm a teacher in Singapore, and the reason why I'm a teacher in Singapore and I'm not a teacher in England is because, so when I first came to Asia about 4 years ago, I'd just come out of university, applied for a ton of jobs, and didn't get any of them. There was no jobs, so I did this teaching English as a foreign language.
Yes.
I came abroad, and I thought, right, I'll spend a few years abroad and then come back and do my teaching qualifications. And then the Conservatives raised the tuition fees to, nearly £10,000. And I thought, why would I? Why would I go back to a place where I don't have as much power as I have here, as in the classroom? You're always scared of in England of getting sued. You can't do anything. More work, and I'm now in Singapore, and I get paid about double what English teachers do in England, and I do half, probably like a tenth of the work.
I do enjoy your honesty.
Genuinely, because I would I did history university, and I would love to be a history teacher, but I don't see any point in it. I'm going to go to university. I'm going to spend a year spending £10,000 learning things that I've already learnt, really, and then another year doing my NQT year, new qualified teacher year, where I know for a fact you get put in really terrible schools. And why would I do it?
Yeah, why would you do it? I mean, well, I'm going to be rude to you, if I may. I'm going to be rude to you, and I'm going to say part of the reason is, well, partly because you're mobile, although that is something, of course, that 52% of the country has just voted to make your generation have less freedom of movement.
Yeah,
you'll still be able to go to Singapore, but you won't be able to go to 27 European Union countries with the ease that you currently enjoy. But the
really
people...
angry about that.
Well, yes, but we've done enough on that for a while. We're having an hour off. But could it be that the people who are signing up to be teachers are a little bit more public spirited than you, or is that unkind?
I don't think. I would. As I said, I would love to do it. I would love to be a teacher in England, and many of my friends are teaching in England, and many of them are also leaving the profession because they've done maybe a year, 2 years, and they are just sick of the paperwork. They're sick of the stress. The utter like overwork, and I do also have friends that say, "Oh, you get all these holidays." You don't really, because the Easter holidays you're marking the whole time. And as I say, I mean, from a purely financial aspect, there is no reason for me to go back.
You're laughing. Well, I mean, I wish you well. I'm late for the news. As a regular listener, you'll know. So your colleagues can tease you tomorrow for being so interesting that I lost track of the time and I go a little late to this. Bunch of questions. What's it like living with the effects of the public sector pay cap, the 1% public sector pay cap, which means, and this isn't sort of sleight of hand economics, if inflation goes up 2% and your wages go up 1%, you're worse off than you were last year. So it's a pay cut. And I don't see why people who try to do the right thing shouldn't occasionally employ the same tactics as people dedicated to doing the wrong thing. So I will keep reminding you that we're discussing the men and women who ran into Grenfell Tower. We're discussing the police officers who run towards the terrorists as the rest of us run away. We're discussing the doctors who will look after us when we are poorly and the teachers who care for our children. These are the people we're talking about, and we've spent 7 years waving through and looking the other way while they had their wages cut. And it has taken this amendment to the Queen's Speech tabled by Labour tonight to crystallise or draw our focus to it. So there's two questions here. There's a question for the people affected directly, which is how directly have you been affected? And then there's a question for the rest of us, which is how did we get groomed like this? How have we moved from that? You know, if you get lost, you find a bobby. My late granddad was a police officer. The picture of him in his helmet as a kid growing up it had a sort of mythical status in my house. The idea that, but teachers, you didn't, you know, I was a naughty little fella, but you respected teachers. Generally, they were forces for good. Doctors and nurses, the idea that they deserve anything other than our most undiluted praise. Oh, well, some of them earn as much as... God, just get lost, honestly. And show me a GP with a yacht, and then we'll have a conversation about whether they get paid too much, all right? It's incredible when you think about what's... And I don't know when it started. If I was feeling lazy, I'd say 1979, Margaret Thatcher, milk snatcher. But I'm not feeling lazy. I very rarely feel lazy when I have the pleasure and the privilege of your company. It's the other 21 hours a day I've got a problem with. But how has this actually happened? How have we actually ended up at being a country where we're simultaneously being told not to bash bankers, that if we want to sort of increase tax for very wealthy people, we're damaging wealth creation, while simultaneously waving through pay cuts for the most precious public servants on the planet? It's mad, right? Or not? You tell me why it's not. Seriously, I really would welcome that angle. 0345 6060973. Steve's in Dunstable. Steve, what would you like to say?
Yeah, good morning, James.
Hello, Steve.
I'm a retired police officer. I'm a sergeant. I was a sergeant.
Yeah.
And when I retired 12 years ago, my salary was in excess of 45,000. On top of that, there was overtime. And on top of that, we used to get the free travel on trains.
Yes.
Plus the buses and tubes.
Adds up.
So you add it up, it's probably, with overtime, I was on £55,000 a year. I talk to some of my colleagues. We all talk about things.
Yeah.
Now we've retired, and think we couldn't probably do this job now, with the way in which the benefits, the salaries have all been eroded,
and the cost of living, combined
cost of living
and property.
Exactly. And now I'm lucky. I mean, I live in a house; it's paid for.
Yeah.
But not only that, everybody. I remember we used to enjoy going to work. When I talk to some colleagues, and some of the younger officers, they don't enjoy going to work now. And the reason being they enjoy their job, but they're quite often frustrated. Number of reasons, not being allowed to do their job as they want to do it. But also, some of them do it because they want to be police officers. Not the money. They want to be police officers. Sounds a cliche.
No, it doesn't.
Like doing the job to help
it's a vocation.
You know what I mean?
I mean, some people will have gone into it, and all of the public sector. Some will contain some people who've gone into it for pragmatic reasons. They've weighed up their options. They've looked at what they fancy doing. They like the hours. But I'm a passionate believer in the concept of vocation. Otherwise, I don't think there'd be anybody doing a lot of this. I mean, so you look at the comparisons with other areas. What? I mean, I'm not being unpolitical. I refuse. I mean, politics is everywhere and everything. When people say don't politicise it, I think they're usually acting out of self-protection and self-enrichment. But 12 years gives you a really interesting perspective, because that's almost the period over which... So what, from 98 to from 2008? No, it's the last 7 years, really. The public does just seem to have... Well, I would say let you down, but you would probably not agree.
Well, yes and no. I think the problem is that some people have got an attitude about police officers or about emergency services in general, because everybody seems to think you're in safe jobs. I remember when it started to erode. I remember when housing allowances were being taken away, cleaning tokens taken away.
Yeah.
But the point being, the pensions, we had a good pension scheme. They've changed that now. They've changed that. I believe me. I don't think I could have been running around the streets at 60, chasing criminals or fighting with people. If that sounds crude, but that's sometimes what you have to do to protect.
Of course, it is
yourself. But the point is, to allow somebody to walk the streets at 60, I don't think is a good thing. And I've seen the erosion. I've seen the conditions change. And yeah, you've got to politicise it a little bit. Because it's the political masters that make the decisions. And it's people that I find that advise these people don't always advise them in the right way, because maybe they're looking at their own little nest eggs at the end of their careers as well. But, emergency services, it's a unique job. Whether you're a firefighter, a paramedic or a police officer, it's a unique job. It's a different job. And you're dealing with members of the public. And quite often you're dealing with the more undesirable types.
Well, obviously, you're doing the jobs that you're keeping the rest of us safe, and often it goes unreported and unnoticed because you've been successful in doing so. It's not just the diminishment in material rewards that I'm thinking of. There's a diminishment in the respect. I don't know whether this is me being rose-tinted.
No, James, you're not.
No, I'm not, am I? And I don't, how do you think that's happened? There won't be a simple answer to that, but that looks to me like a process of grooming. A society has been groomed into a place where it will accept the dilution of material reward, pay, diminishment in pay and diminishment in respect for emergency services, for all of you.
Yeah, the reason being, forgive me, I know what your views are, but I think we've allowed a percentage of liberalism to get out of hand. And, if years, before I joined the old bill, I was in the Air Force, and I understood that I got authority above me, and I had to do as I was told. Somebody in the street now, if you ask them to move, more often than not, you get a mouthful. And of course, then
I think that's the opposite of liberalism. We won't agree on this. I think that's teaching people that they're you don't have to do what you're told. There's no sort of structure. It's an arrogance born of the idea that there's no such thing as society. But I was talking more in terms of respect. I was talking more about people who can be. More about the reaction to when you complain, when police officers complain, when firefighters complain, when junior doctors complain, when teachers point out their plight. Not in the way that you've done, but often, they might go on a march, or there might be industrial action, which I know police officers can't take. And the public never support them. That's the thing I don't understand.
No, nor do I, James, nor do I. And you're absolutely right. I mean, you do a job, you're wanted when you're needed. I suppose in some respects people say, well, why should I think about a police officer or a firefighter until I need them?
Yeah.
And to a degree, I can understand that. But on the other hand, there's got to be that safety net so that if you do need them, you pick a phone up and you get somebody straight away. The problem as well now is because of the way the systems are working, they will look at a computer and the computer might decide the urgency, and they say, no, we don't need anybody. But as you know, in the past, they turn up, and sometimes that urgency is too late.
You're absolutely right to highlight that. That is absolutely part of the process that I'm clumsily trying to articulate. You've helped enormously, Steve. Thank you. Because what we were saying the other day, that you don't decide whether or not you need something by asking whether you used it yesterday. You decide whether or not you need something by asking whether you might need to use it tomorrow. And that, in the context of public sector cuts, could be a matter of life and death, in my humble opinion. It's the gully sucker principle. They got rid of all the gully suckers and then wondered why the streets flooded at the first sign of torrential rain. But it's much more serious on things like fire and police. So regardless of whether or not the specifics of recent cuts to the fire service had an impact upon the Grenfell Tower response, and I pray to God it didn't, because that would add the ultimate insult to the injury already endured. What firefighters who are kind enough quite often to communicate with me off the record, what they're pointing out to me in their droves at the moment is if there'd been another major incident that night, God forbid, that 2 weeks ago today we'd been talking about another major incident. I told you when I woke up that morning, I was woken by my wife's phone because she the behest of news desks from Australia and America, so they had already registered the size of the story and rang us, and my stomach did somersaults. I thought it's another terror attack. Another one, and it was the same buzzing phone in the small hours that made you do that. And then, of course, it turned out to be worse than any of the recent terror attacks, and continues to get worse. But what if there'd been both? This is what the firefighters have warned me. Sometimes they will look like flabby, over-resourced organisations, but when you find out you haven't got enough, it's always, by definition, too late. And this is part of the grooming process as well. Why does the Sun print stories about fire engines getting cats out of trees, or police officers being filmed parking on double yellow lines where one of them bowls into Boots to buy a couple of sandwiches or a tub of Zit cream? Why is that news, my friends? I don't know. I don't know why that's news, unless it's part of a grooming process. So that when the police turn around and say, are you sure you should be cutting our wages to plug holes in the national finances caused by billionaires and bankers? Yeah, of course we should. Damn police. I haven't had a pay rise for years. Why should the police get one? How do you create that environment? I'm not wrong, am I? It is part of the process. I remember a columnist who I like and I've known for years during the firefighters' last round of industrial action, writing utter poison, witless poison, about firefighters, about police officers. That's how it happens, isn't it? You turn two fire engines turning up to get a cat out of a tree into a news story, and then 6 months later, when firefighters are complaining about their terms and conditions being ripped up and chucked in a bin, we, like lemmings, just follow. It's 10:45. Mead says, I hope I pronounced that right, mate. We could actually, yeah, if I get punched in the face, I'd rather deal with whoever is doing the punching. Nowadays, people just want to make sure others get a punch. I think that's true. I first coined that. I first arrived at that conclusion myself during conversations about pensions, public sector pensions. Well, my pension's been ruined. Why shouldn't theirs be? I said, well, hang on a minute. Yeah, my Auntie Doris got mugged last week. I don't want your Auntie Doris to get mugged next week, just to sort of even things up. And then I don't know if this is true or not, because the ideology of these sort of positions often seems to me to be... I never know how deliberate it is, but Soothing Hum, which is a nice Twitter handle, says public spending is never good, is part of the ideological dogma of the neoliberals. And then conversely, of course, more money for services becomes blasphemy. And I just want to know how you think this has happened, especially if, and I'm saying this quite a lot at the moment, because I am genuine and sincere in my desire to try to find some areas of agreement and harmony in a country that's tearing itself apart utterly unnecessarily. If you normally shout at me when we talk about public sector, don't shout at me today. Ring me and tell me how you think, not only why you think you're right, you may have changed your mind about that as you reflect upon the fundamental injustice, the public state-sanctioned callousness of cutting the wages of the men and women who risk their lives on our behalf on a daily basis. But how do you think you ended up? Talk to me about how you got groomed into that position. You sort of haven't been perhaps a particularly passionate espousal of the more money for services is blasphemy position. We simply can't afford it. Public spending is a... what would you, when you look back and think, how the hell have I ended up being on the side of the tax-avoiding billionaire newspaper owners and the enemy of the firefighters and the police? How has that happened to me? I'm not a bad person. Give me a ring and talk me through what you think happened, how that happened to you. Because I bet those stories I just mentioned played a part in it. The fire engines turning up to get a cat out of a tree, the police officers photographed on double yellow lines because they're buying a burger. 10:52 is the time. James is in southwest London. James, what would you like to say?
Yeah, hi. First time caller.
You're very welcome.
Yeah, basically worked for the NHS for over 20 years. Feel privileged and blessed to be able to do the job I do. But it's just more and more frustrating every single day.
Why?
Budget's being cut. We're treating more and more patients every year. But rather than getting new equipment, we're having to make old equipment last longer. And it just seems, it's just frustrating for the people that are doing it.
How do you think I don't know whether you've ever given this any thought, but do you feel that the public should have done more to protect you from this incremental diminishment in status and income?
My argument would be down to the politicians. I mean, what was their pay rise last year, this year, the year before? Was it 1%?
No, I think it was quite a bit more than that, but is that? I mean, I understand the emotional impact of that argument, but I don't know that I see the intellectual impact of it. I mean, their wages are not set by them. They've changed the rules specifically to insulate them from the accusation that you've just made. I understand why it hasn't worked. It doesn't wash with you. Ipso set their income. But so you feel they don't care enough, because this is where Corbyn appears to be gathering momentum. He's tabling, I think, genuinely, love him or loathe him, he has been banging this drum for years, so he cares, and yet he's been on the fringes of politics for years. If I asked you to point at a politician that had stuck up for NHS workers over the last 20 years, who would you point at?
That's a difficult one. I don't know there. But I mean, as someone that's worked within the NHS all the time, my last pay rise was 2006.
I know. There it is.
You go. It's frustrating. We love our jobs. We do our jobs because we enjoy doing it, and we are lucky for that. But you would like to see some sort of reward apart from just being able to help someone.
And what I mean, I'm asking you to solve the greatest mysteries of our time, James, to be honest with you, and you probably just finished a shift. But how have the public abandoned? How has that happened? How have we ended up? Because here's an example. I'm a paramedic, says Chris. You're spot on. The Mail and the Sun ran stories about gold-plated pensions for public sector workers, all the negative press, and the result is that paramedics now have to work until they're 67 to get their pensions. How have you been separated from the people that you look after? That for me is the abiding mystery of our time. The people you look after have been persuaded that somehow, at the very worst, you're not on their side, and at the very best, you're living a life of Riley while they suffer on Struggle Street.
I think that's a harsh way to look at it. I mean, I think the general public that I meet regularly, and I'm in a department where I get to see and build relationships up with these people because they're not just one-off patients. I see them on a regular basis. They love, respect, and understand what we're doing. But can they physically change how we earn and how...
I wonder if it's like immigration. I wonder if it's like the faceless horde people have been conditioned to despise and hate, but the actual nurses and doctors that they come into daily contact with, I don't mean you, you're great, I really love you, I really love the work that you're doing, but then they open up the paper the next day and there's a story about gold-plated pensions or 6 fire appliances attending a cat up a tree or some coppers in a lay-by pulling over on a yellow line to get some sandwiches. And it's like the faceless public sector workers have been targeted, they've been turned into a focus of hatred by many of the public, but the actual real people, the ones that exist and that we see every day, we still respect and admire. Does that make sense, or am I losing it?
No, it makes total sense. Total sense. And so immigration, we need immigration within the NHS. The workers that come in are fantastic.
Yeah, well, they're not coming in anymore, mate. They're off. They're all going.
Yeah, and likewise, the people that have worked in the NHS for ages are now leaving and working for agency because they can earn 1.5 times, 2 times what they can earn in the NHS.
Which is privatisation.
Exactly.
And that, I mean, they might be earning more, which in the short term is very, very good, but for every pound they earn, there'll be a few pennies making their way into the pockets of the shareholders, the dividends, the people who exist to make money out of having money, people who run almost everything. But even I worry a bit about sounding like a communist when I start talking like that. It's the allotments next. This is my big theory. I try to imagine what it would be like to be one of these so-called neoliberals. I can't quite imagine it, but I do think that we've got some people who fit this description in the very front line of British politics now. They find every penny that makes its way to people without an economic justification. They find it abhorrent. They find the idea of people living in North Kensington, social housing in North Kensington, they say. I can only just afford 7 bedrooms in North Kensington. How can these peasants get a flat effectively for free? And they hate it. They genuinely hate it. Graveyard. Why have we got graveyards on real estate that we could sell for millions? There are allotments near me that must constitute some of the finest land in London, just over the road from me, near the river. And I know that people must look at those allotments and think, poor people growing potatoes when it could be rich people growing their fortunes. And that is not weird or hard to understand. What's hard to understand is how the people growing the potatoes somehow get conditioned into being on the same side as the people who'd rather the land was turned over to help them to grow their fortunes. James, thank you. I might crack on. Do you want to stay with this for a bit longer? We seem to be coming at it from some slightly new and refreshing angles. 0345 606 0973. Can you try out, give that theory a run out? Because I'm pretty clear that that's what's happened with regard to immigration. Just ask an EU national about their conversations with friends or colleagues who voted to leave. Every single one of them will have been told at some point in the last year, oh, no, I don't mean you. No, I don't mean you. I don't mean you. I mean that Romanian cannabis grower on the front of the Daily Mail today. That's the reason why I voted to turn your life upside down, because I'm cross about him. Is the same true of the public sector? So we have this amorphous image in our minds of a blob of public sector workers living a life of Riley. High on the hog at our expense. They've got pensions and I haven't anymore. I'm on a 0-hour contract and they at least know how much they're going to earn at the end of every week when they turn up for a shift on Monday. It might be less than they did last year or even less than they did 10 years ago. But at least they know. So we've got this amorphous enmity towards the public sector, very carefully cultivated, groomed by the media. But actually, when we come face to face with them, the police officer, the firefighter, the nurse, the doctor, the teacher, we love the bones off them. I think we're onto something there. And that is just like immigration. It's as if, I don't know, it's as if reality has been completely skewed by the necessity of making everything into a binary battle. Part life. I took my foot off the fascist pedal after the American election. The playbook of fascism was being followed so closely by Donald Trump. But then he won, and I thought, well, I must have missed it. Must have got that wrong, clearly. Absolutely 100% clear now that I was absolutely right. And it's getting worse, because now they're trying to undermine news media. So when I get a text like this, I used to giggle. I apologise for that. Because I'm beginning to think you might have been right all along, and I might have been wrong. It's about undermining societal structures. This is a text, I've lost it now, but I can remember what it said, so I just can't credit the person that sent it. Until we don't care for each other anymore, and we don't know what's true or not true. Really? Again, I kind of find myself thinking that's a little bit tinfoil hat. But then look at America, okay? People with whom we have enormous amicability, and this whole fake news thing. So there have been resignations at CNN over a story that claimed an American called Anthony Scaramucci, who's a friend of Donald Trump's, was being investigated by the Senate over links to a Russian investment fund. Very respected and respectable journalists. The story's fallen down. They haven't been able to back it up. Well, the full details will probably emerge in the fullness of time, but because, you know, a bit like when a BBC journalist says, oh, I had that story last week, but I couldn't double source it. If you work at the BBC, you have to double source it. You have to go to your line manager and say, I've sourced it with 2 independent people. And then you can go to air with it. You work at the Daily Mail, let's just say the process is rather less rigorous. And as a result of that story falling down, 3 journalists at CNN have just resigned, okay? Now, quite rightly, you could argue. I personally wonder whether the editor could have put an arm around them and sent them on gardening leave. But that's what principled professionals do when they work in the arena of objective, genuine news. They've made a mistake. They possibly got sold a pup, or they simply can't find the evidence that they need to prove that it's true, or they were told something that wasn't true and they reported it in good faith. They made a mistake, so they resign. And the story and CNN change it. Then you have a president in America who talks a lot about fake news while offering White House accreditation to a man who believes that the Sandy Hook massacre, where children were killed in their school, shot dead, was a hoax, and that the dead children were actually actors covered in tomato ketchup and fake blood. And Donald Trump talks about fake news, and a significant swathe of his core support go along with him. So the very definition of proper news is an organisation that sees its reporters resign when it is found that they have made a mistake. Okay, that is proper news. The very definition of fake news is the stuff that Donald Trump uses to promote his position. And there are plenty of people cheering it in this country. I imagine there are people envying it in this country, in the political and the media sectors. And if you think, oh, yeah, all right, James, that's quite a good point. But, I mean, is it really as crushing as you think it is? He's just been told by Time magazine, Donald Trump, to take down fake magazine covers from his country clubs. He actually has framed magazine covers in his country clubs that are completely fake. Magazine covers effectively saying, Donald Trump's amazing, The Apprentice is the best programme on television. Not mocked up like parodies, like you get if you've ever worked on Fleet Street when you leave. They do a mocked up front page for you. One day, if I ever get a show after The Watershed, I'll tell you what it said on mine. But the actual the Time magazine have said, you've got to take that down. You can't do that. That's our so you've got a man talking about fake news who has actually fake, genuinely fake, not even open to dispute or discussion or debate fake magazine covers on the walls of his country club. So you think sometimes, oh, it's not as bad as all that. Well, how do you think these things happened historically? How do you think these things happened? They happen because slowly, everything's getting turned upside down. And then you come back to Britain, where, thank God, things aren't that bad, although Brexit very much fits into that category of... I heard from Daniel Hannan last night, a prominent Brexit campaigner on social media, and he was arguing, you remember all the calls we took yesterday from EU nationals who live here, this is their home, and they're feeling deeply, deeply aggrieved at the change in their status and the change in their circumstance. And he tweeted back to me with a straight face that their status isn't changing at all. Their status isn't changing at all. If they leave the country for 2 years, they're not allowed to come back. He's deleted the tweet now, which is the nearest, I suspect, that you ever get to an admission of error or guilt. But it's nuts now. So far down this rabbit hole have we gone that even a simple statement of truth is open to question is open to quibbling. And I think this is what we're looking at here. When I say to you, how have we been turned into a country that feels anything but respect and gratitude towards our emergency services, towards our public sector? How has that happened? I still don't know, but the media has massively played a part, and I don't know why. These guys are my friends, my colleagues, past and present. Why would they want to live in a country where firefighters are treated like fraudsters and police officers are treated like petty criminals? And when they complain about the terms and conditions they get, we just shower them in shoddiness. Why? What's in it for them? I should ask them, I suppose. Chris is in Enfield. Chris, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James. Thanks for taking my call.
You're very welcome.
Appreciate it. No worries. Just actually in answer to the question you just made.
Yeah.
Truthfully, I don't know why. I don't know why or when the public's perception of us changed, although it definitely has changed.
Has it really? How long have you been in the job? How long have you been? You're a firefighter?
I'm a firefighter. Yeah. I've been in 11 years now.
Okay.
And I can come at it with a little bit of a different angle because my dad was a firefighter.
Ah, okay.
He was a firefighter for 30 years, retired a few years back. And I remember as a kid growing up being in absolute awe of my dad and my friends feeling the same. I was so proud to go to school and go, my dad's in the fire brigade. The local fire station would come down and they would do a talk, etc. And I'd go, my dad's one of them.
Yeah.
And my friends would love it. Everyone would love it. Now, how I feel is completely different. I'm genuinely embarrassed to tell people I'm a firefighter. Not because I'm not proud of what I do. I'm a little bit sceptical of their reaction to it. You know, I meet new people or we go on holiday and me and my partner, I'm one of those lucky public service workers that gets to go on holiday once every other year. So when we're on holiday, if we meet new people and they go, oh, what do you do for a living? I have to take a breath and go, I'm in the fire brigade. What do you do? And then I try and move on as quick as possible because I'm worried about what their reaction's going to be.
Really? I mean, I want to reassure you, but I can't question your reality because it's yours and you're describing it to me. But have you ever actually had the negative reaction that you fear? Have you had the
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I get it. I get it from a few of my friends. However, I'll take that as a little bit of ribbing, a little bit of joking. But I genuinely do get it. I do get it. Oh, I take it you're one of those firefighters that goes on strike every other week. Yeah. Oh, I take it you've got a second job. Oh, you sleep all night. How's your darts arm? You must be great at darts nowadays. And that is genuinely what we get. And like I said, I have to take a breath sometimes and go, do I really want to tell them? Or do I just want to move on and talk about something else?
That's sad. That's really sad. And it's the polar opposite of what your dad's status was in society. Yeah. And also your dad was better paid than you are.
Well, yeah, it was, yeah. But I genuinely don't know when that changed. I don't know when. I mean, I don't know what sort of when I was a kid. I don't know how adults' perception of firefighters was back then because I was, obviously a kid.
I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure in 1982, if you'd said to someone you're a firefighter, they would not have said. Well, it's the teachers and the holidays again, isn't it? Actually, Chris. So I'm a teacher. Oh, yeah, God, that's an easy life, isn't it? All those holidays. I'm a firefighter. Oh, yeah. How's your darts? I bet you chasing three-figure breaks in snooker now, aren't you? Because you get so much practice. That kind of thing. I don't know, but I'm pretty sure when we were kids, it was the same for the grown-ups. They'd have felt the same about the public sector, the emergency services.
Well, I hope so. But I mean, this is not me, spouting. This is
no, I know it's not.
Genuinely, how I feel. When I joined the fire brigade, I was proud as punch. The first few years, I was absolutely proud as punch. But with the cuts, the morality, how I feel about the job is completely different now.
Where's the breaking point, do you think? Because I mean, I've got a very troubling text I'll read in a moment from a watch manager in the fire brigade, and for one of your colleagues perhaps. But he talks about morale being at an all-time low. Is there a snapping point?
Well,
because where do you go? I mean, it's not like you can waltz into the private sector and hoover up a juicy job, is it?
This is one of the points I was going to make, and it's brought us onto it nicely, really. When I've spoken to my friends about it, and this was particularly prominent during the pensions dispute,
yes,
they said to me, go and get another job.
Yeah.
Go and get another job. And I'd say to them, but where? I've trained, during the pensions a few years back. I've been in the fire brigade 8 or 9 years, and I would say my training and what I've done for the last 8 or 9 years is more than a degree for me. It's more than the equivalent of learning for a degree. So my friends who are in sales, they get treated shoddily by their employers. They look for another job. They go elsewhere. They look for another job on better terms and conditions and where they're treated better. Where do I go? Because there is nowhere.
And that's what I keep talking about they without being entirely sure who they are, but that's what the guarantee is. That's what the bet is on, isn't it? The bet is on. They'll do it. And we can pair and pair and pair away and chip and chip and chip away at their terms and conditions and at their status in society, because there's no way you can make an assault upon the terms and conditions of a firefighter or a police officer or a nurse or a doctor or a teacher unless you've somehow diminished the status, the esteem in which the British public holds them. They go hand in hand, don't they?
They do, yeah, absolutely.
You ask me for my support when you're going on strike over changes to the pension that was part of the reason why you signed up to be a firefighter in the first place. You're going to get it absolutely slavishly, unless I've got this idea fermenting in the back of my brain that actually you're all on the take and you probably live in Ibiza.
Exactly, and again, it's back to the original question, where has that come from?
And why? Because I know I'm getting close to where it's come from. Unfortunately, I call some of the people responsible for it colleagues and friends, historically and currently. But why? Where is it? Is it just simple tabloid journalism? You get an emotional reaction out of people by saying, "Oh, here's someone to hate today." It could just be that simple. Maybe there's no big conspiracy.
I would just like to think people are a little bit more intelligent than to listen to read tabloid newspapers. But maybe that is where we're at the moment. Maybe that is the brunt of it. Maybe we've got to a level where it's a little bit more of a selfish society. People do look at themselves more and compare themselves more, and if they haven't got it, then no one else should either.
Do you think Corbyn's going to cut through? I mean, because he's the real deal on this issue, but of course the immediate response will be, how are you going to pay for it? And that question will be asked by people who don't ask how we're going to find £1 billion to give to the DUP, but that's life. Do you think Corbyn's going to cut through on this? Because he's championed the cause of people like you for most of his career.
I mean, I'd love to say yes. I'd love to say yes, Corbyn and his administration are going to make things better for the public sector, but I just don't know.
No.
I genuinely don't know. I'd like to think so, and if anyone's got a shot for us, it's gonna be Corbyn. But I don't know. We're a bit of a loss, really. I mean, I don't want to just coming off it. I don't want to come across like I hate my job. I absolutely love it.
But you've read my mind. I was about to say, please tell me that you're still proud of what you do.
I absolutely love it. I really do. Good. I love going to work every day. I love seeing all my colleagues. And, but I just don't like talking about it outside of work. I almost feel like I have to, when I leave work, I completely have to switch off, put it all behind me and not bring it up again until I go back to work.
Yeah.
And even with my partner, I come home, she says, "How was work today?" I go, "Absolutely fine, babe. What's for dinner? What are we doing? What are we doing this weekend?" Rather than having to go, "Oh, this happened," because I just don't like talking about it, which is odd because I'm on the radio talking about it.
I was about to say, well, keep listening to this programme and you'll always have what I think they call a safe space, don't they, in these modern conversations. You'll always be valued and always be welcome here, mate, I promise you, for as long as I've got a microphone in front of me. But do me one little, does your wife work?
She does, yeah.
So when you go home tonight, say, she says, "How was work?" Don't say, "Oh, it was great, babe, what's for dinner?" Say, "Oh, it was great, babe, what do you want for dinner?"
There you go, yeah.
But I'm only doing that because I do exactly what you do, and my wife sometimes points out that absolutely nothing stopping me from taking responsibility for tonight's tea. Chris, thank you, mate. Take care. I'm hearing that 6 people will face criminal charges over the Hillsborough tragedy. And in fact, it may need a new noun, depending on how those criminal charges are followed, because I think generally tragedies are considered to be proverbial acts of God or accidents, aren't they? So 6 people facing criminal charges over Hillsborough, the Crown Prosecution Service have just announced. They will include, I imagine, Norman Bettinson, the former Chief Constable. This is breaking news. And the Chief Superintendent who was in charge on the day, David Duck. Yes, in fact, David Duckenfield, who was the match commander that day, has been charged with the manslaughter by gross negligence of 95 of the 96 disaster victims. That from the Crown Prosecution Service. 2 weeks to the day since, of course, Grenfell Tower went up in flames in circumstances which many people currently fear, with much justification, may also lend themselves to cover-up and obfuscation. That announcement by the Crown Prosecution Service today suggests that the wheels may turn slowly, but they get there in the end. Of course, trials await. Presumption of innocence until any guilt is proven is a fundamental precept of British law, British legal situation. So, yeah, the former Chief Superintendent, David Duckenfield, is among those charged, as is the former Chief Constable, Norman Bettinson. I will get you the full list of people facing criminal charges as a result of that CPS announcement in a matter of minutes. So, you know, we've kind of been lionising the police, haven't we, for the last hour and 20 minutes, and other public sector workers. Why? Because Jeremy Corbyn is to table an amendment to the Queen's speech calling for the 1% public sector pay cap and cuts to the police and emergency services to end. We'll continue that conversation in a minute, but I've got the full list of people now who have just found out that charges have been authorised against them. You have David Duckenfield, who was the match commander for South Yorkshire Police on the day of the disaster, the Hillsborough Stadium, of course, in Sheffield. Graham Henry Mackerel, who was Sheffield Wednesday Football Club's company secretary and safety officer at the time of the disaster. It's in 1989. Peter Metcalfe was a solicitor acting for the South Yorkshire Police during the Taylor inquiry and the first inquests. Former Chief Superintendent Donald Denton of South Yorkshire Police, former Detective Chief Inspector Alan Foster of South Yorkshire Police, and Norman Bettison, a former officer with South Yorkshire Police who went on to become Chief Constable of Merseyside and West Yorkshire Police. The 6 men who will face criminal charges in relation to the Hillsborough disaster and its aftermath. May bring you more on that as and when it emerges, but I think the top line is David Duckenfield being charged with manslaughter by gross negligence. That is the match commander for South Yorkshire Police on the day of the disaster. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we're wondering how the emergency services, Jeremy Corbyn, is poised to put this amendment in place. I tell you what, actually, because we've only spoken to people directly affected by it so far. I don't think I've got any calls from people who realise now they have been groomed. You've woken up to the fact that somehow you've been turned into someone who hates on the people who run into burning buildings and run towards terrorists. If you can pick up on that grooming process, give me a call and talk me through what you think happened to you. It's always very, very hard to admit that kind of thing has happened to you, but at least I don't seem to be, my inbox and my feeds don't seem to be polluted by people saying that we're wrong today. It just is a much bigger step from being quiet to saying I was wrong. But what are you going to do? I mean, if your MP goes into the lobby tonight and rejects this, if your MP goes into the lobby tonight and actually votes to keep the pay cap in place and to continue with the cuts to the police and the emergency services, just on a personal political level, how do you talk me through that? You know, your MP will stand there tonight and agree with the fact that the firefighters and police officers dealing with terrorism and Grenfell Tower at the moment are having real-term pay cuts inflicted upon them, and both services are facing still swinging cuts. Is it just the tabloid line that we simply can't afford it, we have no choice? Or is there something more sophisticated, more subtle that explains why you will applaud your MP for voting in favour of pay freezes for the public sector and cuts to the services? This from a watch manager in the London Fire Brigade. I've been in the Fire Brigade for 26 years, James. Firstly, let's talk about Grenfell and how we coped. It was a 40-pump fire. It might be a typo, that, I think. A 40-pump fire, flurry fire engines, which cleared... No, 40. It must be a typo on the 40. Fire engines, which cleared London of the ability to respond to anything else. But there was also an immediate 20-pump relief without any fire engines leaving. So it was actually a 60-pump fire. Firefighters worked for 10, 12 hours with no relief because it wasn't available. This happens all the time now, James. Response is less, slower, less weight of attack on first attendants. We see this, we shout out about this. Our pensions ripped up. I've got to work an extra 8 years and will be lucky to get my pension at all now, as I may fall foul of capability and get myself sacked. Pay, I'm worse off than I was 8 years ago, and I've been promoted in the interim. I'm getting into debt, and I'm now looking at having to move from a house to a flat just to be able to buy food. Morale in the fire brigade is at an all-time low. And yet, when Jeremy Corbyn calls upon members of the House of Commons later today to help people in that position, he'll fail, and he'll be called a communist in tomorrow's newspapers. I just want to know how you think we've ended up here. Jack's in Gravesend. Jack, what would you like to say?
Morning, mate.
Hello, Jack.
I was going to speak about my dad. He's a fireman, and it's not really something I've had much of a passion for in the past, to be able to stick up for him. But recently, it just seems that it needs to be done. If you know a fireman, if you appreciate them, you've got to voice it. And I've watched him be so passionate about his job for the last 20 years now. And he's not money driven at all. No one you meet in these services are money driven in any way. We've always said to him when he moans about the money, why don't you move up? Why don't you get promoted? He says, I love what I do. I don't want to be away from the action and helping people. That's why he does it. And we've had times where we'll be at dinner and he'll tell us about his day and we go, oh, blimey, easy day for you. Yeah. And he will get so angry and we'll be sitting there thinking, blimey, he's a bit sensitive.
Yeah, all right, Dad. All right, Dad. Can't smell the cheese. Calm down, mate.
And I'm going to admit, it weren't until the kind of recent events where I actually went up to my dad. He was sitting at home, kind of after a night shift. And I just went, I'm really sorry for how many times I've ripped into you in the past for having an easy day. And it's difficult to kind of see how little respect they get. For example, when they go on strike, people would just be like, no worries, you carry on striking, we'll go and get someone else to go and save that cat in a tree. Yeah. Imagine if they'd been on strike during Grenfell.
Well, they'd have all piled. I'll tell you what would have happened. You know this better than I do, and your dad will confirm it if you don't. They'd have piled straight back to work as quickly as humanly possible.
This is exactly it, and I've never met a bunch of people that are just so pro-happiness and not money.
Pro-people.
Pro-people. And I've said to the girl on the phone, I've actually recently applied for the fire brigade in Kent.
Have you really?
And I've done the fitness assessment the other week, and I tell you what, if I struggled and I'm 23, they're going to have to do that test at like 50, 60, which is one thing. But I've got an interview for it next Friday, and I cannot tell you how much I just want to smash it and get in there now. The money's obviously not ideal, but I can't think of a better job in the world in terms of helping people and making a difference.
And sleeping at night.
And the final thing I'll say to highlight lack of respect out there, my girlfriend's father has told her she should think about finding someone with a bit more ambition.
There's a lot to pick over there, Jack, isn't there? I mean, first up, if the son of a firefighter can have fallen into that kind of lazy, lead-swinging narrative, then what hope is there for the rest of us? But I'm staying out of your relationship, mate.
No worries.
11:30 is the time. Good luck to you, and tell your dad how proud you are as well. Not just how sorry you are for the gags in the past. 11:30 is the time. Not long ago, Sue Hemmings of the Crown Prosecution Service made an announcement which I think can be fairly described as historical.
At the turn of the year, the CPS received the first full files of evidence from Operation Resolve and the Independent Police Complaints Commission in relation to their investigations into the Hillsborough disaster and the events which followed. The Operation Resolve files comprised approximately 85,000 pages, and the IPCC South Yorkshire Police file in excess of 30,000 pages. Additionally, there's estimated to be up to 1 million pages of unused material which needed to be assessed. Operation Resolve investigated the events of the 15th of April 1989, when 96 Liverpool fans were tragically killed as a result of overcrowding. They referred files in respect of 15 suspects. The IPCC investigated the aftermath. In particular, they looked at the conduct of the South Yorkshire Police, whether anyone was responsible for a cover-up of the true events, and if witness statements were altered in such a way as to amount to a criminal offence. They referred files in respect of 6 suspects on this aspect of the case. There is a further IPCC file into the conduct of the West Midlands Police, which amounted to about 60,000 pages, but additional investigative work was required in respect of this. Additionally, just this week, the IPCC has referred 2 further suspects which are unconnected to the matters sent to us in January. These subjects are subject to ongoing consideration by the CPS, and we will announce our decisions in due course. The suspects referred to the CPS included individuals and organisations. Following these thorough investigations and our careful review of the evidence in accordance with the Code for Crown Prosecutors, I have decided that there is sufficient evidence to charge 6 individuals with criminal offences. These are summarised as follows. There is sufficient evidence to charge former Chief Superintendent David Duckenfield with the manslaughter by gross negligence of 95 men, women and children. Mr. Duckenfield was the match commander on the day of the disaster. In order to prosecute this matter, the CPS will need to apply to the High Court judge to remove the stay imposed at the end of his 1999 private prosecution. This process will commence shortly. We are unable to charge the manslaughter of Anthony Bland, the 96th casualty, who died almost 4 years later. This is due to time limitations imposed by the law as it applied at the time. Former Chief Constable Norman Betterson is charged with 4 offences of misconduct in public office. This relates to alleged lies he told about his involvement in the aftermath of Hillsborough and the culpability of fans. Graham Henry McCrell is charged with 2 offences of contravening a term or condition of a safety certificate contrary to the Safety of Sports Grounds Act 1975. He is additionally charged with 1 offence of failing to take reasonable care for the health and safety of other persons who may have been affected by his acts or omissions at work under the Health and Safety at Work Act 1974. Mr. McCrell was Sheffield Wednesday Football Club's company secretary and safety officer at the time. Peter Metcalfe is charged with doing acts with intent to pervert the course of public justice relating to material changes made to witness statements. Mr. Metcalfe was the solicitor acting for the South Yorkshire Police during the Taylor inquiry and the first inquests. Former Chief Superintendent Donald Denton and former Detective Chief Inspector Alan Foster are charged with the same offence for their involvement in changes made to witness statements. The defendants, other than David Duckenfield, will all appear at Warrington Magistrates Court on the 9th of August. Criminal proceedings have now commenced and the defendants have a right to a fair trial. It is extremely important that there should be no reporting, commentary or sharing of information online which could in any way prejudice these proceedings. I have not authorised charges in relation to any other individuals or organisations. The reason for these decisions are set out in a written summary that we've published today.
Crucial caveat at the end there from the Crown Prosecution Service. You can actually jeopardise a trial even by sending tweets, expressing opinions or sharing information that could prejudice a jury. But I think I'm on fairly safe ground when I tell you that this could not have happened without something called the Human Rights Act, the European Convention on Human Rights. Up until 2004, what's called coronial law, as in the laws and regulations that govern coroners' courts. Coronial law only allowed for very, very narrow inquiries into how someone had died. So you were only allowed to almost do the medical side of it, the biological explanation of why somebody had died. Article 2 of the European Convention on Human Rights, which was incorporated into our own Human Rights Act, allows groups to seek inquiries that are specific to that article. They're Article 2 compliant, which means that a jury can be convened to assess, and I'm going to get these words right, so I'm going to read them, the wider circumstances behind a death or deaths when coming to a verdict, not just the narrow question of how a person died. How do I know this? Well, because Mark George QC, who represented 22 of the families at the recent inquest, was clear, absolutely clear, that without Article 2 of the European Convention on Human Rights, that inquest would not have happened. Okay? What's on the front page of the Daily Mail today? You guessed it. Why we don't want, need, or welcome the European Convention on Human Rights. Because a couple of Romanian crooks haven't been slung out of the country yet. Just weigh them up next time the European Court of Human Rights pops up in conversation. Weigh up those two priorities. The fact that these criminal charges would not have been brought without the Human Rights Act incorporating the European Convention on Human Rights, or a Romanian cannabis grower who's stuck in Dover. Rachel Venables is here to talk us through some more of the detail behind this announcement today, Rachel.
Yes, well, it's been quite a dense announcement, and of course nearly 3 decades in the making. I've got the full sheet here, or the full release that the CPS has released. As you heard there, of course, from Sue Hemmings, 6 people have been put forward to be charged over the Hillsborough disaster, which took 96 lives back at an FA Cup semi-final in 1989. I'll run you through some of the charges again and maybe give a bit more detail. The first is against Chief Superintendent David Duckenfield. Now, he was the match commander on the day of the disaster, and he's being charged with manslaughter by gross negligence of 95 men, women and children. Now, the CPS statement here says that they will allege that David Duckenfield's failures to discharge his personal responsibility were extraordinarily bad and contributed substantially to the deaths of each of those 96 people who so tragically and unnecessarily lost their lives. So the match commander here. We also have Graham Henry Mackerel. He was Sheffield Wednesday Football Club's company secretary. He was a safety officer at the time. He's charged with 2 offences of contravening a term of condition of a safety certificate. So that regards the safety of the event itself. Then we come down to Peter Metcalfe. He was a solicitor acting for the South Yorkshire Police during the Taylor inquiry and the first inquests, and he's charged with doing acts with intent to pervert the course of justice relating to material changes made to witness statements. We obviously have to be so careful here. We can't go into the details, the allegations that we've heard over the last few years, because these men should soon be facing trial. But obviously we know that witness statements, the validity of those is something that's been questioned for years, particularly by the families of the 96. And we also have 3 other police officers: former Chief Superintendent Donald Denton, former Detective Chief Inspector Alan Foster, and former Chief Constable Norman Bettison as well. He's charged with 4 offences of misconduct in public office relating to telling alleged lies, and that's coming from the CPS, who have today decided to charge 6 people over the Hillsborough disaster. Great job, Rachel Venables. Many thanks indeed. And as Rachel quite rightly reminded us all, and we all need reminding of this, however many miles you may have on the clock in this profession, this story automatically now goes off limits for any discussion that involves opinion, interpretation, description, allegation, or dissemination. It is for the courts to decide. It's coming up to 11:45. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where I'm left with a decision about what we talk about next. I may take a few more calls. So many of you queuing up. Is anybody going to talk about being groomed? Is anybody prepared to explain how you think you've ended up in it? Because I can't do this without sounding holier than thou. Nothing new there. Yeah, all right. The point is, I wasn't groomed. Ever since that first round of industrial action, I only came politically alive when I got this job. I wasn't really politically alive before that. I just had a bunch of student slogans. But talking about firefighters in particular made something sort of come alive inside me, and it's never gone away. And it's this ludicrous, almost unbelievable way in which we as a nation have been turned against the people charged with protecting us, and we've sat idly by as their terms and conditions have been diluted and diminished, and their status, the respect that they enjoy in society, has been chipped away at by, mostly people in my profession, I'm afraid. And if you are having a bit of a moment this morning, you're going, Christ, he's talking about me. How do you think you ended up being on the other side of the argument from the men and women that run into Grenfell Tower and run towards terrorists? 0345 6060 973. And then I think we'll talk about the English tests for Uber drivers that have been kicked into the long grass once again by the grinding wheels of the British legal system. It's 11:45. I'd like to talk about Uber in the next hour, but I want to tell you something funny first, which is, Lewis, I'll be with you imminently, I promise. I won't keep you for more than a couple of minutes. I was chatting to a mate who works in social media last night about trolls and my particular passion for or my strange magnetic effect that I have on some of the vilest people on social media. And he didn't believe me. He thought I was exaggerating. And I didn't know you can actually find all the accounts that you've blocked.
And I said, mate, I promise you, I've had to block probably thousands of people. And I only really block for either foul language or really, really vile views, you know, about these people should be rounded up and killed, that kind of thing. And he didn't believe me. And I said, oh, well, and he said, but you can find it. You know, you can go on, I'm rubbish like this. Either my 11-year-old is showing me how to program Sky, or my mate who works in social media is showing me something about my own Twitter account. He goes, you can find all your accounts. And I said, really? And I said, I promise you, if we look at these, then they will still be talking to me and about me every day. And he thought, you're so arrogant. Don't be ridiculous. So we found it. I've blocked 1,734 people. And we picked 10 at random, and 8 of them had tweeted about me or to me in the last 24 hours. There's something rather wonderful about the idea of some foam-flecked half-wit sitting in his mum's back bedroom in a dirty toweling bathrobe with a Tesco laptop on his knees, just shouting all this bile, spitting all this venom into an ether, into a vacuum where there isn't anybody listening except a few other foam-flecked bathrobe-wearing inadequates tapping away on their Tesco laptops in their mum's back bedroom. But the reason I mention this is partly to give you a smile, but also because I was very sad to see how many of them in their profile descriptions were cab drivers, green badge holders and cab drivers who have over the years really sort of laid some of the nastiest stuff on me. And I mention that because if we do talk about Uber, if we have time in the next hour, I will once again be pursuing that argument from the position of Uber being an appalling infringement of basic decency on the rights and the heritage of cab drivers in this city. And it's odd, it gets harder every time, so I'm not going to be going into my 1,734, that number's probably going to go up today, 1,734 blocked accounts, of which an appallingly, a depressingly large amount were actually black cab drivers in their accounts, despite the fact, I don't know if you can think of anybody else who's put the boot into Uber more regularly and more effectively than we have on this programme, but hey, there you go. It's about self-interest. I mention it because it's also relevant to the conversation that we're having, as how you can be turned against people who are on your side. I don't get it. But it's up and down the country. 11:53 is the time. If you want to do PMQs live, just send me a text saying yes, all right? Send me one saying no. So we might take PMQs live at noon. I think it'll probably be a good one. So just send me a yes or a no to 84850, or don't tweet me. It'll block up my inbox. So just text 84850, yes or no, and then you decide. If it's a majority, we'll take it's the will of the people, innit? We'll take PMQs live in 10 minutes time or so. Sorry, Lewis, Brixton. What would you like to say?
Hello. First off, yes.
Yes. Okay. Right. You're on. That's the first vote. The ballot is open, ladies and gentlemen. Second off, what?
Hello. I don't really do this much. I'm a good speaker with my friends, but not public or anything like that.
You'll be great.
I'm a firefighter. I've always wanted to ring in and thank you for your support, because in the past it was pretty much one of the very few supports we had. A voice that we didn't have, because people were groomed. They were groomed by the media, especially in the last 10, 12 years. I've been doing the job about 17 years now, and it's almost never been particularly fun politically, particularly fun in the papers. We're always rubbished.
What if I said why? What would your answer be? Why? Just a nice easy target, or is there something more sinister going on?
I just think it's an easy target. Being groomed by the media, to me, just taps into people's, I don't even want to say jealousy, because, you know, not many people would want to do an emergency service job, but it taps into, you know, the initial reactions you get from a lot of people is what's already been said by a couple of callers. It's, well, you already, you know, you get a good pension. Yeah. You can do, you know, you do 2 jobs. I don't want to do 2 jobs.
No.
I don't want to do 2 jobs. My missus and me have had enough trouble over the years because she just wants me to be at home with the kids.
Of course.
You know, who wants to do 42 hours? I do 48 per shift, but, you know, on average, it averages out at 42 a week.
Sure.
You know, who wants to do 48 and then go out and do a second job for at least 30 or 40 more hours?
Yeah. Just
because my shifts allow it. It doesn't mean I get to see my kids anymore. And it's not very fair. And at the moment we're sort of enjoying, in the worst possible way, we're enjoying a bit of adulation, and people are looking up and thinking, you know, we really do risk our lives. But people risk their lives every single day.
Yeah.
Every single time a firefighter walks in, it could be a small flat job fire. It could be, you know, someone in the river. You know, we're doing stuff, and no one really cares, and rightly so. Why should they?
Well, no, but of course they should. No, don't. I mean, that's the bit I don't get, Lewis. Is that... and look, if it's coming across as holier than thou on my part, then I'll deal with it. It isn't on your part. I'm baffled by why you would just say, of course, like it's just a matter of fact that these people don't routinely respect and regard you and treat you with gratitude, and B, how you avoid taking it personally, how it doesn't somehow. So it's oddly, talking about the taxi drivers a minute ago, it doesn't slow me down, it doesn't make me any less opposed to Uber, but I can't quite see how you don't run a bit more slowly into a building when you think it might be full of people who are fitting into the category that you've just described.
Because it's the job you choose. I suppose that's the bit that hurts you most when someone tells you that I will get another job. It's such a bad argument. I mean, I want to swear sometimes.
Of course you do.
How dare you say that to me? Because I choose to do this. You don't have to tell me I could go somewhere else. I know I could. But the fact is that my wage is so low. I wasn't political until 2010.
Yeah.
I didn't care. I'm envious sometimes of my younger brother, who annoys me over his views of politics because he just doesn't care. I mean, he's I wouldn't say he's poor, but, he doesn't do very well due to, the government and the way they do sort their benefits. He still works hard. He doesn't get more. He doesn't get a good wage.
Yeah.
But then when it comes round to things like Brexit or it comes round to this election, he's voting completely something that's clearly going to ruin things for me. But I respect that. But he doesn't care, and I sometimes hark back to I wish I didn't care.
You and me both. I mean, you and me both. Although
so much,
we'd both be out of a job though.
Oh no! But there's a couple of things that people have said that they've nailed it.
Go on.
Pensions, the wages. I get told today Corbyn will, hopefully it won't happen, but as you said, he will get shouted down for this. But he'll get shouted down by the very people who will tell me I have a second job, whilst enjoying the benefits of either 2 or 3 non-executive posts in jobs that get them 6 figures on top of their MP wages. I don't begrudge people earning money, but he's going to make a decision that I shouldn't get any more. I'm sick of earning a low wage. I'm sick of it. And this Grenfell Tower, luckily for me, I wasn't on the first initial part of that.
Yeah.
I don't know how these people are going to cope, and it's the worst possible way, as I've said, that we can all suddenly realise that these people do a good job. Because a good friend of mine, I don't know if he'll recover very well.
Sure.
I'm not saying he's far too strong, I believe, to do anything. But
it's not about strength, is it? It's just you can't say someone's too strong to break their leg. If something mental breaks, it's just the same conflagration of circumstance and luck, isn't it? It's not strength. I'm not digging you out. But people who work in the sector tell me that the vocabulary needs to change because people will only come forward to help if we change the words that we use to describe their problems. So say broken, something in your mate might have broken.
I think it has, because it was the scale of it. I mean, I looked at a tweet yesterday from somebody, and it was naming the youngest child that died in that. And it sent me to tears for a good couple of hours. And I wasn't even on the initial part of that job. And if that's doing it to me, what's it doing to them? And all we were asking, James, we're not even asking, because we haven't asked for ages, because as soon as you ask for more wages, you get shouted down.
Front page of the Mail, front page of the Sun, the queuing up, naming and shaming, finding pictures of you and your union leaders having the audacity to be having a £25 bottle of wine in a wine bar. Well, I mean, you know what happens. You know better than I do what happens.
Look at today. In the Sun, I can't stand that paper. I can't stand these tabloids. But in the Sun today, it's very subtle. There's a picture of a woman and a man on the back of a fire engine, and to me, it's already there. They're going to start discrediting us again. Subconsciously, they're letting us know that these firemen, they have a lot of fun on the back of these fire engines.
The tide's got to go back out again, because if the heroism and the potential sacrifice and the suffering that will be endured by the colleague and friend you describe, if that's allowed to get around the world, then their whole agenda begins to shake and crumble. So 5 years ago, I may not have actually chimed with you on this. I think it is deliberate. And I also think they want some of the questions surrounding Grenfell Tower to go away. Lewis, mate, stay safe.
Thanks very much.
No, thank you. And for what it's worth, it's not just with your mates that you can talk a dime a dozen. That was absolutely sparkling. Just don't ever ask me to come on exercises with you, all right? I don't want to compare my skill set to yours. It's just gone 12 noon. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC.